They didn't just lock the doors of Caldwell Manor, they erased it from maps, sealed its windows, and warned an entire town to forget it ever existed. For decades, no one dared cross its gates, because those who knew the truth understood something far worse was buried inside. Tonight, that silence ends. This is the macabre truth behind why Caldwell Manor was sealed for decades. Where are you listening to this story from? Are you alone in your room, or perhaps gathered with loved ones? Either way, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because stories like the macabre story of Caldwell Manor deserve to be remembered, shared, and never forgotten. For years, Caldwell Manor stood in silence at the edge of town, untouched, unnamed, and deliberately avoided. No signs marked its gates, no records explained its history. It was simply there, watching. Locals learned early not to ask questions, not about the boarded windows, not about the iron locks that were never removed, and certainly not about why the property was sealed so completely, as if something inside was never meant to leave. At night, the house seemed different. The air around it felt heavier. Sounds carried farther than they should, and those who lingered too long reported the same uneasy feeling, the sense that the manor wasn't empty, and never had been. Whatever happened inside Caldwell Manor was buried on purpose, not to protect the house from the world, but to protect the world from what remained inside. Caldwell Manor did not announce itself. There was no sign at the rusted iron gates, no address carved into stone, no welcoming path leading toward its towering silhouette. The road that approached it narrowed without warning, as if the land itself resisted being traveled. Trees grew unnaturally close together here, their branches arching overhead like interlocking ribs, filtering the daylight into something pale and sickly. Most people in town avoided this place without ever admitting why. They called it the old property, or simply that house, speaking the words quickly, quietly, as if naming it too clearly might draw its attention. Children were warned not to wander near the woods where the manor stood. Teenagers, brave only in groups, dared each other to approach the gates at night, but never crossed them. And no one, not once in living memory, had ever gone inside. Caldwell Manor had been sealed for decades, not abandoned, not forgotten, sealed. The difference mattered. From a distance, the house looked frozen in time. Its stone facade, once pale and elegant, had darkened with age and neglect. Ivy crawled up its walls in thick, twisting veins, pressing against shuttered windows like searching fingers. The roof sagged slightly in places, yet stubbornly refused to collapse, as though the structure itself were determined to remain standing, watching, waiting. On the morning the locks were finally broken, the sky hung low and colorless, a blanket of clouds pressing down on the land. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy, as if sound itself had grown cautious. Evan Mercer noticed it the moment he stepped out of his car. He paused, keys still in hand, and scanned the tree line surrounding the manor. No wind stirred the leaves, no birds called from the branches. Even the distant hum of the town seemed absent here, swallowed by the thick woods. "Feels dead," he muttered. Evan was not easily unsettled. As a historical archivist contracted by the county, he had spent years documenting abandoned hospitals, condemned prisons, and forgotten estates. He believed in decay, in neglect, in the slow erosion of places once filled with life. He did not believe in haunted houses, at least, not yet. Behind him, the gravel crunched as another car door closed. Mara Collins adjusted the strap of her camera bag and looked up at the manor with a professional calm that didn't quite hide the tension in her shoulders. "No trespassing signs," she said. "No warnings. Nothing." "That's because they didn't want attention," Evan replied. "Sealing it quietly kept questions away." Mara frowned. "That's not how these things usually go. Places like this attract rumors. This one feels erased." Before Evan could respond, a third figure joined them. Thomas Reed, the county's legal representative. He was older, greying at the temples, his expression tight and uneasy. "We're not here to explore," Thomas said firmly. "We document, we catalogue, we leave." Evan nodded. In and out. None of them said what they were all thinking. That no one who had ever been associated with Caldwell Manor seemed eager to see it opened. The iron gates groaned as Evan forced them apart. The sound echoed far longer than it should have, reverberating through the trees like a warning call. Mara raised her camera instinctively, capturing the moment the gates parted, capturing perhaps the first official image of the property in over half a century. Beyond the gates, the driveway stretched forward, cracked and overgrown, leading straight to the house's imposing front doors. Each step closer made Evan's skin prickle, an awareness he could not explain. The manor loomed larger than it had from the road. Its windows, though boarded from the inside, reflected the dull sky in fractured pieces. Evan had the strange impression that the house was not merely empty, but expectant, like a held breath. At the front entrance, thick chains wrapped around the doors, secured by multiple locks bearing the county seal. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure no one entered. "Overkill," Mara whispered. "Or necessity," Thomas replied, his voice barely audible. As Evan cut through the final lock, the metallic snap sounded unnaturally loud. The chains fell away with a heavy clang, settling against the stone steps like discarded restraints. For a long moment, no one moved. Evan placed his hand on the door. It was cold, colder than the morning air should allow. He hesitated, a fleeting thought flashing through his mind, a warning with no words attached. He pushed it aside and pulled the door open. The scent hit them first, not rot, not mold, something older, stale, like dust that had been sealed away for so long it had forgotten the outside world existed. The foyer was vast and shadowed, its high ceiling disappearing into darkness. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister thick with dust. Portraits lined the walls, their faces obscured beneath heavy cloths nailed into place. "Why cover paintings?" Mara asked. "Privacy," Evan offered weakly, but even as he spoke, unease crept deeper into his chest. Covered portraits were not unusual, nailed cloths were. Their footsteps echoed as they stepped inside, the sound unnervingly sharp in the silence. Evan glanced back at the open door, suddenly aware of how thin the line was between inside and out. Behind them, the door creaked. Then, slowly, it closed. Mara spun around. "Did you—" "No," Evan said quickly. The latch slid into place with a soft, deliberate click. No one spoke. Thomas moved toward the door, testing the handle. It opened easily. "Draft," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Evan turned back to the interior, forcing himself to focus. He raised his flashlight, sweeping it across the foyer. Dust motes danced in the beam, thick enough to resemble fog. Furniture sat exactly where it had been left, chairs pulled slightly away from tables, a fallen candlestick on the floor, as though someone had stood up in a hurry and never returned. Time had stopped here. "Look at this," Mara said, pointing toward the base of the staircase. Evan followed her gaze. Footprints, faint but unmistakable, pressed into the dust. Old but not ancient, leading up the stairs, and none leading back down. A chill ran through Evan's spine. "That's impossible," he said. "This place hasn't been opened." Thomas swallowed hard. "Then why does it look like someone left in a hurry and never finished leaving?" Above them the manor creaked, not the natural settling of an old building, something slower, heavier, as if weight had shifted upstairs. Evan felt it then, the certainty, cold and immediate, that opening Caldwell Manor had not disturbed something dead. It had disturbed something patient. No one moved for several seconds. The footprints at the base of the staircase seemed to press deeper into the dust the longer Evan stared at them, as if responding to attention. They were narrow, uneven, and strangely deliberate. each step spaced with careful intent, not hurried, not random. "They're fresh," Mara whispered. "That's impossible," Thomas said again, louder this time, as if volume alone could make the statement true. Evan crouched beside the first impression. The dust around it was thick, untouched elsewhere. He ran a gloved finger just beside the mark, careful not to disturb it. "Not fresh," he said, "but not decades old either." He stood slowly, eyes tracking the line of prints as they climbed the staircase and vanished into darkness above. "Someone was here after the house was sealed," Mara said. "Or," Thomas replied, his jaw tight, "someone never left." The manor answered with a soft creak from the upper floor. Evan forced himself to breathe evenly. Old houses made noise. Wood expanded. Temperature shifted. That was all. He raised his flashlight and aimed it up the stairs. The beam revealed warped steps, the railing carved with intricate patterns that time had softened but not erased. At the top of the staircase, the light dissolved into shadow. "We document the ground floor first," Evan said. "No reason to rush upstairs." Thomas nodded immediately. Mara hesitated, then agreed. They moved deeper into the foyer, passing beneath a massive chandelier coated in dust, so thick it dulled the crystal's shine. To the left, tall double doors led into what appeared to be a formal sitting room. Evan pushed them open. The room smelled different from the foyer, heavier, faintly metallic. Tall windows lined the walls, each boarded from the inside. Heavy drapes hung motionless, their fabric stiff with age. Furniture was arranged with unsettling precision. Chairs faced inward, angled toward the center of the room, as if once occupied by unseen guests. A tea set rested on a low table, cups still placed on their saucers. Mara lifted her camera, snapping photographs in silence. Evan noticed the clock on the mantel. It had stopped, not at midnight, not at some symbolic hour. It had stopped at 3:17. "Does that mean anything?" Mara asked quietly, following his gaze. "Not yet," Evan said, "but it probably will." They moved from room to room, each space telling the same quiet story. A dining hall where plates remained on the table, food long since reduced to brittle remnants. A library where books lay open, pages curled and yellowed as though interrupted mid-sentence. No signs of struggle, no obvious damage, just absence. And always the sense that something was watching. As they entered the West Wing corridor, Evan noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The dust here was disturbed. Not footprints, drag marks. Thin, shallow lines etched across the floor, leading toward a closed door at the end of the hall. Thomas noticed them too. "That wasn't furniture," he said. "No," Evan agreed, "too narrow." They approached the door slowly. It was different from the others, reinforced with metal plates and secured with a heavy latch on the outside. Sealed from this side. Evan's hand hovered near the latch. "County orders didn't mention this," Thomas said. "We're not authorized to—" The manor groaned. This time, the sound came from behind them. The door they had entered through, the front door, slammed shut. Mara gasped. Evan spun around, heart hammering. The house fell silent again, the sudden stillness more frightening than the noise. "That wasn't a draft," Mara said. Evan forced himself to remain calm. He walked briskly back down the corridor toward the foyer. The front door stood closed, just as before. He tested the handle. It opened. Nothing blocked it. No locks engaged. He stepped back inside, unsettled. "The house is playing with pressure," he said, though the explanation sounded thin even to his own ears. Thomas rubbed his temples. "We should call this in." "No signal," Mara said, holding up her phone. "Nothing since we crossed the gates." Evan returned his attention to the reinforced door. Something about it felt deliberate, purposeful. "Let's open it," he said. Thomas shook his head. "We don't know what's in there." "That's the point." After a tense moment, Thomas stepped aside. Evan lifted the latch. The door opened with a low, reluctant groan. The room beyond was small and windowless. The air inside was colder, sharper, carrying the faint scent of iron. Shelves lined the walls, empty except for dark stains that had soaked deep into the wood. At the center of the room stood a single object, a chair. Its legs were bolted to the floor. Leather straps hung loose from its arms, cracked with age. Mara's camera lowered slowly. "This isn't storage," she whispered. "No," Evan said. "It's containment." On the wall behind the chair, words had been carved directly into the stone. The letters were uneven, jagged, as though etched in haste or desperation. Evan leaned closer, reading them silently. "Do not listen." A chill crawled up his spine. "Listen to what?" Mara asked. Before Evan could answer, a sound drifted through the manor. Faint, almost gentle, a low hum, echoing through the walls like a distant lullaby. It did not come from any single direction. It came from everywhere. Mara clutched Evan's arm. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," he said. The sound pulsed softly, rising and falling, threading itself through the silence. It carried a strange familiarity, as if Evan had heard it before, in a dream perhaps, or in the quiet moments just before sleep. Thomas backed away from the room, his face pale. "We're leaving, now." The humming grew slightly louder, not aggressive, inviting. Evan felt a sudden, irrational urge to follow it, to trace the sound to its source, to understand. He shook his head sharply, breaking the spell. "Cover your ears," he said. Mara did so immediately. Thomas followed, though his hands trembled. The humming faltered, then faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in on them from all sides. For a moment, the manor seemed to sigh. Then from upstairs came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, measured, descending. Evan's blood ran cold, the footprints. "They're coming down," Mara whispered. The first step creaked, then another. Something was moving toward them from the upper floor, something that had been waiting for decades. The footsteps stopped, not abruptly, not with panic. They stopped with intention. Evan held his breath, every muscle in his body locked in place as the silence stretched thin around them. The reinforced room felt smaller now, its cold air pressing against his skin like a warning. Then the humming returned. Closer this time, it slipped through the manor's corridors, curling along the walls, seeping beneath doors and into their bones. Evan felt it vibrate faintly in his chest, a low resonance that made his teeth ache. Mara shook her head violently, hands clamped over her ears. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, as though she were listening despite herself. "No," she mouthed. Thomas staggered back a step and bumped into a shelf. The sound echoed far too loudly. The humming stopped. A pause. Then a voice spoke from somewhere above them. Not loud, not whispering, perfectly calm. "Evan." The sound of his name struck him harder than any scream could have. His heart slammed against his ribs. He had not told anyone in town his full name. The county documents used initials only. There was no reason, no possible way for that voice to know it. "That's not real," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "That's not real." The voice continued, unbothered. "Mara." She whimpered, sinking to her knees. "Thomas." The last name was spoken with a faint note of amusement, as if the speaker had been saving it. Evan forced himself to speak. "Who are you?" A soft chuckle echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls in a way that made its source impossible to pinpoint. "I am what remains," the voice replied, "and you are very late." The footsteps resumed, closer now, descending the staircase with slow, deliberate care. Evan grabbed Mara's arm, pulling her to her feet. "We're leaving," he said. "Now." They backed into the corridor, never turning their backs on the reinforced room. The humming had not returned, but its absence felt worse, as if the house were holding its breath. Another step creaked above them, then another. The figure reached the bottom of the staircase. They could not see it, but they felt it. The air grew denser, heavier, as though something unseen had stepped into the foyer. Evan's flashlight flickered in his hand, the beam dimming and brightening in uneven pulses. Mara gasped. "There's someone there." Evan followed her gaze. The shadows in the foyer had shifted. They no longer fell naturally. They stretched toward a central point near the base of the stairs, pooling together, thickening into a shape that refused to fully form. A silhouette without edges, a presence without detail. Thomas bolted. He ran toward the front door, his footsteps loud and frantic against the marble floor. Evan shouted after him, but the sound died in his throat. The silhouette turned. Not quickly, not aggressively. It turned as if curiosity alone guided it. Thomas reached the door and yanked it open. For a split second, daylight flooded the foyer. Then the door slammed shut with bone-shaking force. Thomas screamed. The sound was cut short. Evan lunged forward, heart pounding. "Thomas!" The silhouette drifted closer to where Thomas had fallen. Evan could see him now, collapsed against the door, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent plea. But something was wrong. Thomas was still breathing, still alive, yet his eyes no longer focused on anything in the room. They stared inward. The silhouette leaned closer to him, and Evan heard the voice again, low, intimate, tender. "Listen." Thomas's body went still. Then he smiled. A slow, empty smile that did not belong on his face. Evan felt something inside him snap. He grabbed Mara and ran. They tore down the corridor toward the west wing, ignoring doors, ignoring the way the house seemed to subtly rearrange itself around them. Hallways felt longer. Corners led to unfamiliar spaces. The manor was guiding them, or herding them. They burst into the library, slamming the door behind them. Evan shoved a heavy desk against it, his hands shaking. Mara slid down the wall, sobbing quietly. "It used his name," she whispered. "It knew him." Evan nodded grimly. "It knows us." "Und du sehl." The library lights flickered as his flashlight dimmed further. Shadows danced across the shelves, stretching and recoiling as though alive. Then Evan noticed something that made his breath catch. A journal lay open on the central table. It had not been there before. He approached it slowly, every instinct screaming at him to stay away. The leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages thick and yellowed. Written in careful, precise handwriting were the words, "If you are reading this, the seal has failed." Evan swallowed hard. The entry continued. "We believed silence would be enough, that isolation would starve it. We were wrong. It does not hunger for bodies. It hungers for attention, for listening." Mara leaned over his shoulder, her breath shallow. Another line was underlined repeatedly. "Once it speaks to you, it never stops." The door behind them rattled, not a violent impact, a polite knock. 1, 2, 3. The voice drifted through the wood, warmer now, familiar. It sounded like Evan's father. "Evan," it said gently, "you don't have to be afraid." Evan squeezed his eyes shut. The knocking stopped. Mara whispered, "It sounds like my sister." The voice changed seamlessly. "Mara," it said, "I've missed you." The air vibrated with pressure, as though the house itself leaned closer, listening for their response. Evan slammed the journal shut. "Do not answer," he said firmly. "No matter what it says." The lights flickered violently. The shelves began to tremble. Books slid from their places, thudding to the floor in chaotic waves. The knocking resumed, louder now, impatient. "You opened the door," the voice said, losing its warmth. "You broke the silence." The door bowed inward. Cracks splintered through the wood. Evan grabbed Mara's hand. His mind raced, piecing together fragments, the sealed rooms, the chair, the warning carved into stone. "Listening," he said suddenly. "That's what it wants." The voice paused, a fraction of a second, enough to confirm it. Evan took a deep breath and shouted into the room, "We won't listen." The reaction was immediate. A scream tore through the manor. Not from the door, not from the hallway, but from the walls themselves. The sound was layered, overlapping, a chorus of voices twisted together in rage and despair. The door burst inward. The silhouette poured through the opening like smoke given shape, filling the room with suffocating cold. Mara cried out. Evan stood his ground, forcing himself not to look directly at it. The journal slid across the table on its own, stopping at his feet. Its final page flipped open. One sentence had been written in fresh ink. There is one way to seal it again. Before Evan could read further, the lights went out. The house fell completely dark, and the voice whispered right beside his ear, "But it will cost you." Darkness swallowed everything. Evan could not see his own hands, but he could feel the manor breathing around him, slow, deliberate, patient. The air pressed against his ears, thick and humming faintly, as if the house itself were listening for something he refused to give. A hand tightened around his. Mara. She was shaking. "Don't let go," she whispered. "I won't," Evan said, though his voice felt small in the dark. Somewhere nearby, wood creaked under shifting weight. The sound did not belong to footsteps this time. It was closer to the groan of something stretching after a long confinement. Then the lights flickered back on, not all at once, one by one. Lamps along the walls glowed weakly, revealing the library in fragments, overturned shelves, scattered books, splintered wood. The silhouette was gone. But the cold remained. Evan's gaze snapped to the table. The journal lay open. The final page was visible now. There is one way to seal it again. Someone must listen until the end. Mara read it aloud, her voice barely audible. "What does that mean?" Evan didn't answer immediately. He felt a dull ache forming behind his eyes, a pressure that pulsed in time, with the faint hum still lingering in the walls. "It means," he said slowly, "that silence alone isn't enough." The door to the library stood open, not broken, inviting. Beyond it, the corridor stretched longer than Evan remembered, its shadows deeper, thicker. The house had changed again. Mara clutched his arm. "We can't stay here." "No," Evan agreed, "but the house won't let us leave the same way we came." As if in response, the journal's pages began to turn on their own, flipping backward rapidly until they stopped near the beginning. Evan leaned closer. The earlier entries were written in different handwriting, different people, different eras. Each entry ended the same way. "I can hear it now. It won't stop speaking. I understand what it wants." The last few pages were stained dark, the ink smeared as if written with trembling hands. "They all listened," Mara said. "Didn't they?" "Yes," Evan replied, "and someone sealed the house afterward, every time." A realization settled heavily in his chest. "Which means," Mara said slowly, her voice tight, "someone stayed behind." The humming grew louder, not aggressive, curious. From the far end of the corridor, a door creaked open. Warm light spilled out, golden and familiar, utterly out of place in the decaying manor. Evan felt his heart twist. He knew that light. It was the color of late afternoons from his childhood, of safety, of memory. "Evan," a voice called softly, "you don't have to be afraid anymore." He stiffened. Mara looked at him. "Is that—" "My mother," he said hoarsely. The voice drifted closer, layered now with another, Mara's sister, laughing softly, calling her name. The house was learning. "Don't listen," Evan said, though the words tasted bitter. "It's not them." The light advanced, filling the corridor with warmth. The shadows retreated reluctantly, as if offended. Evan took a step back. The journal slammed shut. The humming stopped. Instantly, the warmth vanished. The corridor darkened again, and the voice returned, no longer gentle, no longer pretending. "You cannot leave," it said calmly, "not without finishing what they started." The walls shuddered, doors slammed throughout the manor, echoing like gunshots. Mara cried out as the floor beneath them vibrated. The house was rearranging itself again, corridors shifting, paths folding inward. "We're running out of time," she said. Evan nodded. His eyes scanned the room desperately, searching for anything, any clue. His gaze landed on a narrow passage behind a fallen bookshelf. It hadn't been there before. A stairway descended into darkness, the steps worn smooth by use. "This way," he said. They moved quickly, slipping through the passage as the library lights flickered violently behind them. The air grew colder with every step downward, the hum returning, stronger now, closer. The stairway opened into a vast underground chamber. Stone walls curved upward into darkness, their surfaces carved with symbols and words layered atop one another. Candles lined the perimeter, unlit but intact, as though waiting. At the center of the chamber stood a circle of chairs, identical to the one upstairs, all facing inward. Mara's breath caught. "How many?" Evan counted quickly. 7. One chair stood apart from the others, empty. The humming stopped. Silence fell so abruptly it hurt. Then the voice spoke again, no longer hiding its anticipation. "You see now." Evan stepped forward despite himself. "What are you?" A pause. Then, "I am memory. I am regret. I am every thought that was never spoken aloud." Mara shook her head. "You're lying." The voice laughed softly. "I am truth without shape, and you gave me shape when you listened." The candles ignited all at once. The chamber flooded with flickering light. Faces appeared in the stone walls, not carved, pressed, as if people had been absorbed into the rock mid-scream. Mara covered her mouth to stifle a sob. "They stayed," Evan whispered. "All of them." "Yes," the voice said. "They listened until there was nothing left of them but understanding." The empty chair slid forward slightly, scraping against the stone. It stopped directly in front of Evan. "You read the journal," the voice continued. "You already hear me. That makes you suitable." Mara grabbed Evan's arm. "No, there has to be another way." The chair shifted again, waiting. Evan felt the pressure in his head intensify, thoughts blurring at the edges. Fragments of whispers brushed his mind, stories that were not his, memories he did not want. "If I sit," he asked quietly, "will she be allowed to leave?" A long pause followed. Then, "Yes." Mara stared at him. "Evan, don't—" He turned to her, forcing a small, sad smile. "If no one stays, it follows us out." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then I'll stay with you." The voice cut in sharply. "Only one." The chamber trembled. Evan stepped toward the chair. Mara screamed his name. At that moment, the journal slid across the stone floor, stopping at Mara's feet. It fell open to a page Evan had not seen before. Mara glanced down. Her breathing hitched. "Evan," she said slowly, "it's lying." The humming surged. "What does it say?" Evan demanded. Mara swallowed hard. "It says the one who listens doesn't seal it." The voice roared. The candles flared violently. "It binds it," Mara shouted, "to the house forever." The walls screamed. The empty chair lunged forward. Evan felt the presence wrap around him, cold and furious. "Run!" he shouted at Mara. "Now!" The chamber shook violently as cracks raced across the stone walls. Shadows tore themselves free, writhing toward Evan as he braced himself. Mara hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then she turned and ran. The chamber howled in rage. And as Evan stood alone before the chair, the truth finally settled in his chest. Caldwell Manor was never sealed to keep something in. It was sealed to keep someone from leaving. The moment Mara disappeared up the stairway, the chamber sealed itself. Stone groaned against stone as the entrance collapsed inward, cutting off the last trace of escape. Dust filled the air, stinging Evan's eyes. He coughed once, then steadied himself, forcing his breathing into slow, controlled rhythms. The chair stood inches from him now, waiting. The candles flickered erratically, casting warped shadows that twisted along the walls like living things. The faces pressed into the stone seemed closer than before, their mouths stretched open in silent pleas. "You cannot run any more," the voice said, no longer calm. "You chose." "I didn't," Evan replied, his voice hoarse. "You manipulated us." A low, resonant laugh echoed through the chamber. "All choices are manipulations. Some are simply more honest than others." The pressure in Evan's head intensified. Images bled into his thoughts, memories that were not his. A woman sealing a door with trembling hands, a man carving warnings into stone until his fingers bled, a child sitting alone in darkness, listening as the walls whispered truths no one should know. "You were never alone," Evan said quietly. "You were fed." The laughter stopped. For the first time, the presence hesitated. The chair scraped forward again, its legs grinding against the stone. Leather straps lifted slightly, as if stirred by an unseen breeze. "Sit," the voice commanded. Evan did not move. Instead, he turned slowly, scanning the chamber. The symbols carved into the walls were not random. They repeated, overlapping in layers, forming a pattern, a cycle. 7 chairs, he murmured. 7 listeners. "Yes," the voice said cautiously. "And every time the house is sealed, one remains behind," Evan continued. "But the seal always weakens, because you're not contained. You're anchored." The candles dimmed, the presence stirred restlessly. "You are clever," it admitted. "That is why you were chosen." Evan stepped backward, careful, deliberate. "You don't want a listener," he said. "You want continuity." The word struck something unseen. The chamber shuddered. "You exist through attention," Evan pressed on. "Through memory, through repetition. Each person who listens becomes part of you, but not enough. You need someone who understands you." Silence fell. Then softly, "Yes." The admission sent a chill through Evan's bones. "That's why you let Mara go," he said. "You needed a witness outside, someone to remember this place." The candles flared violently, their flames bending toward Evan. "You will sit," the voice snarled, "or she will return." Evan closed his eyes. He pictured Mara running through the shifting corridors, the house attempting to confuse her, to lure her back. He pictured her refusing to listen, refusing to look back. "I won't sit," he said firmly, "but I will listen." The chair froze, the straps trembled. "You already are," the voice said, almost pleading now. "Yes," Evan replied, "but not the way you want." He knelt on the cold stone floor. The pressure in his head surged, nearly dropping him to his hands. Voices flooded his mind, centuries of confessions, regrets, unspoken thoughts screaming for release. Evan gritted his teeth and stayed grounded. "I'll hear everything," he said through clenched teeth, "but I won't remember." The chamber screamed. Cracks splintered through the stone walls as the presence recoiled violently. "That is impossible." "Is it?" Evan shot back. "You said it yourself. You are memory, and memory can fade." The candles began to extinguish one by one. The faces in the walls writhed, their features blurring. "You will break," the voice hissed. "They all do." Evan's vision darkened at the edges as the torrent of whispers intensified. He felt his own memories being pushed aside. His childhood, his name, Mara's face, threatened by the weight of Chud's thoughts pressing in. He focused on one thing: silence. Not the absence of sound, but refusal. He listened without absorbing, heard without accepting. Let the words pass through him like wind through broken glass. Minutes stretched into something shapeless. Time lost meaning. The voice weakened, its tone shifting from rage to desperation. "Please," it whispered, "do not leave me alone again." Evan opened his eyes. The chamber was nearly dark now, lit only by a few dying embers. The chair stood motionless, inert. The pressure in his head receded slightly. "You were never alone," Evan said softly. "You just refused to be forgotten." The presence shuddered. "And that," Evan continued, "is not the same thing." With a final, echoing wail, the chamber collapsed inward, not physically but conceptually. The whispers unraveled, dissolving into formless noise before vanishing entirely. Silence fell. True silence. Evan slumped forward, gasping for breath. The candles went out. The faces in the walls faded, leaving behind blank stone. The chair cracked down the center, its leather straps crumbling into dust. Somewhere above, a door unlocked. Light filtered down the stairway. Evan staggered to his feet, dizzy, disoriented. His thoughts felt thinner, lighter, as if parts of him had been gently erased. He climbed the stairs slowly, emerging into a corridor that no longer shifted beneath his feet. The manor felt empty. At the top of the stairs, the front door stood open. Mara waited just beyond it, her face pale, eyes rimmed red with tears. She ran to him, grabbing his coat. "You're here," she breathed. "I thought—" Evan shook his head gently. "It's done." They didn't look back as they crossed the threshold. Behind them, Caldwell Manor stood silent. Still, the gates closed on their own as they reached the road. Days later, the house would be sealed again. Records would vanish. Maps would change. But somewhere, deep within the walls, something fundamental had been lost, the ability to be remembered, and that frightened Evan more than anything else. Because as he stood beside Mara, watching the manor disappear behind the trees, he realized something was missing. He could no longer recall why the house had terrified him so deeply, only that it had, and that was enough. Caldwell Manor did not collapse. It did not burn. It did not rot away into history like so many forgotten places. It remained. From the outside, it appeared unchanged, silent, sealed, and unremarkable to those who passed by without knowing where to look. The trees leaned inward once more, reclaiming the driveway. The iron gates rusted shut. Records quietly adjusted themselves, as they always had. But something fundamental was gone. The house no longer listened. Evan noticed it first in the days that followed. At the hospital, doctors spoke in careful tones, assuring him his symptoms were temporary. Disorientation, memory gaps, fatigue. Trauma, they said, a natural response to stress. Mara sat beside his bed every day, telling him stories about what had happened. Or at least, what she remembered happening. "You stood there," she said softly, her fingers twisting together. "And the house, it screamed. I felt it even outside, like something tearing itself apart." Evan nodded, listening. He always listened. But the stories didn't settle inside him the way they should have. They passed through him, leaving only impressions, cold stone, flickering light, a chair he could no longer picture clearly. Some nights he dreamed of rooms without doors, of voices speaking without sound, of a house trying desperately to remember its own name. He woke every time before the dreams finished. When Evan was released, the county quietly reassigned him. No explanations were given, no follow-up investigations approved. Caldwell Manor was officially listed as structurally unsound and permanently restricted, sealed. Again. Mara returned to the site once. She didn't tell Evan at first. The gate was closed when she arrived, chained and reinforced, as though no one had touched it in decades. New warning signs stood along the perimeter, their language vague and bureaucratic. She stood there for a long time, listening. Nothing answered, no hum, no whisper, no sense of being watched, only wind through the trees. And yet, as she turned to leave, she felt it, a hollow absence where something immense had once pressed against the world. The house had not been defeated. It had been emptied. Months passed. Life resumed its shape, but not its weight. Evan returned to work slowly, documenting places that felt small compared to what he could no longer fully remember. Abandoned schools, closed theaters, harmless ruins. Sometimes, while writing his reports, his pen would pause mid-sentence. He would forget what he was describing, not the facts, but the feeling, as if emotion itself had slipped through a crack he could not see. "You okay?" Mara would ask. "Yes," he always said, and he believed it, until the dreams changed. The rooms returned, but now they were blank. No whispers, no faces, no pressure, just walls, endless silent walls. Then one night, Evan woke with a start, heart racing. There was a sound in the room, not a hum, not a voice, a breath, slow, measured, patient. He sat up, scanning the darkness. Nothing was there. And yet the sensation lingered, not of being watched, but of being recalled. The next morning, a letter arrived. No return address, no postmark. Just his name, written neatly on the envelope. Evan stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 sentences. "The house does not remember you, but it remembers that someone left. That absence is loud." Evan's hands trembled. Mara read the letter later that day, her face draining of color. "That's not possible," she said. "It's gone. You emptied it." "Did I?" Evan asked quietly. That night, the dreams returned in full. This time, the house was smaller. Stripped, rooms bare except for one thing, a door, unlabeled, unmarked. Evan approached it slowly. When he opened it, he did not see darkness. He saw himself, sitting in the chair, listening. He woke, screaming. From that night on, Evan began to notice patterns, whispers in crowded places, not voices, but moments where sound dipped unnaturally low. People pausing mid-conversation, frowning as if they had forgotten what they were about to say. And always, that sense of something searching. Not for him, for a replacement. Mara noticed it too. Stories surfaced online, isolated, dismissed, unconnected. A sealed house in another state, a building no one could remember entering, a room people refused to describe after leaving it. Different places, same absence. "The house wasn't unique," Mara whispered one night. "It was a node." Evan closed his eyes. "And now it's unanchored," he said. They both understood the implication. Without memory, the presence could not exist. But without a place to bind it, it could drift, searching for attention, for listening, for someone who would sit. Weeks later, Evan returned to Caldwell Manor alone. The gate resisted him this time, not physically, but psychologically. Every step forward felt heavier, as if the air thickened with reluctance. The house stood unchanged, but hollow. He placed his hand against the front door. Nothing answered, no hum, no whisper, just old wood beneath his palm. "I won't listen," he said aloud. The words felt necessary, final. He turned away. Behind him, deep within the manor, something shifted. Not awake, not asleep. Aware. And for the first time since the house was built, Caldwell Manor did not wait. It forgot. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to loosen what had once been bound. Enough to let something unfinished slip quietly into the world. No longer a house, no longer a voice. Just an idea. A need. And somewhere far from Caldwell Manor, someone paused in a quiet room, feeling the sudden, inexplicable urge to listen.